The important thing is to take that data and do something with it, and not just say, I have Assent just for the sake of having Assent. Assent is important in a program because it lets us improve a program. It's not just because not just for ethical reasons. And I think that's an important thing, because ethics is kind of at the center of this movement, at least in the ABA world, which is good, but we need to remember there's practicality to this. This should be an opportunity for us to take feedback on our programs and improve them. We're not just doing it to be ethical, we're doing them to be effective.
Welcome to the Animal Training Fundamentals Podcast, where we have fun with practical application and we go deep into the science of behavior. Put them both together and you get results, solutions for challenges, and the tools you need to achieve your training goals. I'm your host, Barbara Heidenreich. Let's talk training. Welcome back to another episode of the Animal Training Fundamentals Podcast. And we've got another great topic for you, Assent in animal training. What does it mean? As you'll see as we get discussing this topic, it needs a little bit of clarification. And I'm super excited to bring very important guests with me to discuss this topic. We have Anna Linnehan and Awab Abdel-Jalil. They've written some articles that were recently published, and they're going to help us dissect this topic a little bit more. Before we jump into the interview, I want to be sure to introduce these two incredible scientists and practitioners to you. First of all, Anna Linnehan is the Associate Director of Practicum and Supervision in the Program of Applied Behavior Analysis at Endicott College. Anna earned her master's and doctoral degrees in Applied Behavior Analysis from Endicott College. She began her career as a professional chemist, of all things, and has a passion for improving the lives of others through science. Her doctoral dissertation, Variables in Tacting Emotions, a Programming Contingency Analysis, utilized the Goldiamond Lang theory to teach emotional concepts using a contingency analytic framework. Her research interests include using contingency analysis paired with instructional design to develop programs to help individuals identify and problem solve their own emotions and emotional behavior. Anna is also interested in the application of signal detection theory to analyze decisions and decision-making behavior. We're going to have to get into that topic some other podcast. That's another great topic. Additionally, she is passionate in the dissemination of nonlinear contingency analysis, and we do get into that quite a bit in this podcast, and programming based on Israel Goldiamond's constructional approach. She recently co-authored a book, Decisions and Judgments in Ambiguous Situations, a conceptual introduction to signal detection theory with Dr. T.V. Joe Lang. She has also served as a member of review boards for a variety of behavioral journals and serves as an advisor of the Cambridge Center for Behavioral Studies. So now let's get to know Awab Abdel-Jalil. So he is a senior behavior analysis researcher at Upstate Caring Partners in New York. He's also a current PhD student at Endicott College under T.V. Joe Lang's mentorship. Awab began his study of behavior analysis as an undergraduate at the University of North Texas and carried his passion for the science into the graduate program. On the graduate level, he completed his thesis under Dr. Jesus Rosales-Ruiz's guidance. Awab co-authored the book Nonlinear Contingency Analysis, Going Beyond Cognition and Behavior in Clinical Practice. He also recently co-authored 2 papers on nonlinear constructional approach to assent in behavior analysis in practice. And that is exactly what we're going to dive into in this podcast. So sit back and enjoy.
Well, I am super excited to have guests Anna Linnehan and Awab Abdel. I see I said it wrong already. Look at that. Awab Abdel-Jalil. There we go. And the reason I'm so excited is because you have both been authors on some very important articles that were just recently published, and they're very supportive of each other. But I will read the titles just so everybody knows them. And then, of course, we will provide links so that people can look for them. One of them is called Can There Be Compassion Without Assent? A Nonlinear Constructional Approach. And the other one is called Foundations of Preemptive Compassion, a Behavioral Concept Analysis of Compulsion, Consent, and Assent. Ooh, and I know that sounds like a big mouthful, right? but we're going to get into it. So welcome, Anna and Awab.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us. Yeah,
I know
really
these are such important topics, and it's all going to become more crystal clear for people as we dive in here. So first of all, I need to ask the question, what inspired these articles? Why were these so important to both of you that we have discussions about these topics?
Okay, I guess I'll go first. So my training is in behavior analysis, and I went to school in that area. And I most of my clinical work has been with humans, and particularly with individuals with a diagnosis of autism and their families. But I think it doesn't matter what organism you're working with. Part of my story is probably similar to a lot of folks, where I had some training, I was out there doing work, but I kind of felt like it wasn't going like as some of the change as quickly as I would have liked, or, the procedures just didn't feel like, I felt like I was missing something, I suppose. And, one of the hardest things was always, can I get staff to implement some of these procedures? And they didn't seem particularly happy, not because they were overly coercive or anything, just, I don't know. It just felt like there was something a little bit more that was missing. And so that's when I continued my training, I was lucky to find Joe Lang and Awab and some others who were doing work in the nonlinear contingency analysis space. And the more I looked into that, the more I thought, well, here's what's been missing. And so the articles are surrounding topics of assent, compassion, consent, but really it's more about how do you develop a program for behavior change for someone or some animal that is kind of like fun to implement, and everyone seems like they're in a space where they're, able to get their needs met in ways that have less coercion. So that's kind of what prompted me. And also in our ethics code, we had a big push for, in the world of ABA, less coercion. We're using a lot of procedures that involved something called extinction. So not delivering a particular reinforcer contingent on a particular behavior. And I don't know how we got there, but it wasn't a great space to be in. So that's a little bit of why I thought these articles were important.
What about you, Awab? Was your journey similar?
Well, if we're specifically talking about the topic of assent, mine was probably a little bit different for me. And actually, before we go further, we should acknowledge that we have 4 other co-authors on the paper who are worth mentioning. So I'll just read them off in the order that they're in front of me on this paper. Rochelle Ike, Kyle Hetzel, Jonathan Amy, and Sheila Click, Dr. Sheila Click. So I just wanted to make sure we acknowledge them before we go on. And of course, Joe Lang, who, mentors all of us. So, but specifically when it comes to assent, to me, it was more like it's a word I started hearing out in the ABA world and kind of ignored it for a while because I'm like, okay, here's a hot new term that came out and people are excited about it, whatever. And then it stuck around for a little bit and people were talking about it more. And then I was like, well, what are they even talking about? Like, what are we saying here when we say assent? So that's when me and Anna connected with the other co-authors and started talking about it and was talking about it with Joe. And of course, the idea of, well, let's do a concept analysis and actually see what are we talking about when we say assent. So it was more kind of like we led into it. I mean, I was led into it that way, was just being like, what is everyone even talking about? Can we come up with an actual like contingency analytic definition of this rather than it just being a buzzword that people use?
So you guys have both brought up few things that I kind of want to dive into a little bit more. I think the first one is a little bit about compassion and ethics, and then maybe we can jump back to this question of what is assent. So maybe who wants to help me out a little bit with compassion, because I think that is something that maybe we can all relate to. Again, it doesn't matter what type of learner you have. I think we all really connect to that thing, like you were saying, Anna, that if if your procedure isn't feeling like you're actually having a good experience, then it feels like something isn't compassionate perhaps, or there's something not right about that. So maybe you could dive into that topic a little bit more.
Sure. What first comes to mind when we start talking about compassion, and I think compassion, back to what Awab was saying, was one of the first sort of buzzwords before Assent that was really going around in the literature, and a lot of talk about making sure that our procedures are compassionate. But again, what is compassion? And we talk a little bit about that in the paper. And when in talking to Joe Lang, we were thinking, and he brought up, well, if compassion is defined by some sort of relief of some kind of distress, what if we could not have the distress in the first place? And I thought that was really interesting, and it's something that I continue to reflect on. Even more recently, this is probably, I'm probably going to be all over the place, so I am sorry for your audience, but I was thinking about this. It happened to me, and then other folks in the neurodiverse community were saying, well, why are you showing me compassion? You're assuming I'm in distress. And I had never thought about that before either. It's kind of like a tangent from your question. But I've had someone try to show compassion to me before too when I wasn't in distress, and I thought that was interesting. So thinking more about the contingencies here as well, or what is actually going on, is more important than just saying compassionate to say you're compassionate. So looking a little bit deeper, I thought was interesting. And we didn't write about that in the paper. That's something that kind of came up for me after the paper was written. But again, moving beyond just the word compassion was kind of interesting. And of course, we want to be compassionate with each other and compassionate with our clients. I hope that's why people are doing the work they're doing, because they care.
Yeah, and I like in the paper, I encourage people to read both papers for sure, but that you do make that distinction that, you can do a great procedure, but you can do it without compassion, but you could also do a procedure with compassion and also get excellent results. And you make that distinction.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that was, I thought I was actually just rereading that recently. And I do think that there are a lot of important little snippets that can be gleaned from each paper. And that's definitely one of them. You want your procedures to be effective, but then you also want to deploy them in a certain way. So the best of both worlds, I suppose.
So, and I do think this might be important to address before we get too much further, just because I have lots of different people in the audience, but maybe we should touch very quickly on what is a contingency.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting thing, because I feel like in the field in general, when people are talking about contingency, there's kind of a loose definition or understanding of it in the vernacular of our field in general. You have an antecedent behavior consequence, that's your contingency. But folks out there like Joe Lang and Paul Andronis like to get a little bit more specific with that definition and give it a formal definition, like a formal logical definition, rather than just kind of the informal one that's usually used. And they like to talk about it as this relation between these three terms of an occasion, a behavior, a consequence. And the relation is that in the presence of in the presence of an occasion, if a behavior occurs, there's a chance a consequence will follow. Now, that chanciness is what makes it a contingency rather than a dependency. So a response can happen by itself, an occasion can happen by itself, an occasion and a response can happen without the consequence. But if the consequence happens, then we know for sure the occasion was there and the behavior happened. So that's kind of that formal relation within a contingency. But to me, the practical relevance of that, beyond just a logical definition, is paying attention to what is the contingency on and who or what is evaluating it. paying attention to a contingency as a requirement. That's why I like using phrasing like, what's the contingency requirement? Because now we're actually, instead of just looking at a consequence, so here's the reinforcer and looking at that, I'm looking at actually what's the requirement that I need to meet to get this consequence, and what's evaluating that response to say it met or didn't meet the consequence. And now we actually get to a point that's a lot more useful in everyday practice. So that's kind of the overview. Anna, you can add if you have anything else.
No, I think that's really, it's so funny because we are constantly talking about contingencies, but to actually define a contingency is hard. And I think that's because it's a contingency. It's not a definition. So it really has to do with looking at the interaction of an organism and environment, and then seeing how that kind of plays out, not to use some of the fancy terms. The other, I'm sure you'll mention it, Barbara, but another book that your audience might want to read is the nonlinear contingency analysis book, which actually does give the formal definition of contingency, but it also gives a definition that is maybe a little easier to digest as an if-then relation between a behavior and a consequence in a particular context. So, if this, then that. But like Awab said, the consequence doesn't have to always be there. So that's, and getting to the requirement part is also very important that Awab mentioned. But that's a way to kind of think about, or the way, if someone asks about a contingency that isn't familiar with some of the technical jargon.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be helpful as we start segueing a little bit more into some of the other elements of these two papers here, which is why I wanted to at least touch on it a little bit. And then maybe that can segue into nonlinear contingency analysis. So what are we looking at when we're thinking in a nonlinear approach to interventions and other things?
Definitely.
Anyone want to take that one?
You mean the nonlinear piece?
Yeah.
Like
so what does it mean when we're not looking at just when it's nonlinear, when we're talking about when people say nonlinear contingency analysis? So again, it's important to look at what, like I just said, the if-then relationship between the behavior and the consequence in a context. But it's also important to think about what happens to that organism if they don't behave, because that can also have an impact on whether or not the behavior occurs. The other thing that is really important to look at is how many available alternatives does an organism have to get to whatever the consequence may be that it's after, which we consider a critical consequence, the consequence that will select the contingency. So for example, if I want an animal to work for food, if it's not hungry, is it going to? I mean, there are other ways that can be established, or there could be other types of behaviors that occur, like different patterns, adjunctive patterns and things like this. But that's like, a little more technical. Those are some of the things to start thinking about when you want to look at a nonlinear component to behavior. So what is happening? What are the available alternatives? And then what happens if the organism doesn't do the thing? Those are some of the things I would add it. I'm sure Awab might have.
Yeah, I think that's really kind of the center of it. And when Goldiamond kind of formally introduced the idea first in his 1984 paper, because there was kind of some laying of groundwork before that in the 74 paper and so on. But the first time actually he said nonlinear was in that 84 paper. And he really talked about it as a question of causality. If I can determine the cause and the function of a behavior using only the A, B, C, then I'm dealing in a unilinear or just a linear relation. But once I have to look at other contingencies, and these are influencing the occurrence, the value of this behavior, then now I've gone into nonlinear. So nonlinear just means there's more than one contingency. The word can sound a little bit hard when people hear it, because you kind of imagine like circles or arrows going all over the place, but that's not what we're talking about at all. What we're talking about more is like layers. There's a contingency, and then there's another contingency under it, and then there's another contingency under it, and what's happening is being determined by the effect that all those contingencies have together. So if you had all the knowledge in the world about one contingency and you still can't predict the behavior, and you need the knowledge of other contingencies and you need to know more about those variables, then we're doing an nonlinear contingency analysis. So it's really that analysis of the alternative sets of contingencies that are involved that gets us into the nonlinear realm.
I love that. And I do highly encourage people to read the book and try to dive into that material. I do find that it impacts everything I do now. I was just doing some consulting work yesterday where we were training giraffes, and I literally, in the moment, you start seeing the contingencies that are impacting the behavior that you're working on, where you're just like, okay, well, that's impacting what I'm trying to have happen right now, and that's impacting what I'm trying to have happen right now, and you're problem solving in the moment, thinking about contingencies is what I start seeing, instead of just thinking about, in this moment I'm giving the animal food, and how does this food impacting the behavior. That becomes just one little piece of the puzzle. So it's really truly been, I would say, life-changing for me in terms of how I address behavior now. So very cool.
That analysis you just defined.
Oh, okay. Well, so great. Well, let's move on then to what we really were going to talk about in the first place. So let's talk about this assent thing. And I think maybe a good thing to start out with, what's the difference between consent and assent? Because that was, I think, even in my community, a lot of people would say consent. And when we started saying assent, they were like, well, what's that? I don't know how those are different. So who wants to tell me the difference between consent and assent?
I mean, no one really talks about assent, period, anywhere. So usually people consider consent as assent. So one of the things that, for me, when I started to think about this, and same thing, what is this? How is it different? What stood out was, for consent, or what's referred to a lot of times as informed consent, is that it's a discrete event. And even if you go to the, look at some of the legalese about consent and the various types of consent defined in legal terms, there is some gray area in terms of social interaction in there, but generally it's a discrete event. You sign a form, you can give verbal consent, and then something happens. And so assent is different in that it's more fluid. There isn't like a one setup that gets revisited later. It's exactly what you just described with the giraffes. You're looking at, how is this organism behaving? And then also, what's the arrangement, particularly in that nonlinear arrangement with the available alternative contingencies? And how many are there that the organism has to be able to obtain what they're after? And so that continual fluidity and contingency analysis is what's required for assent. Whereas in consent, you don't have that. Now you can still have, as we talked about in the paper, you can still have different degrees of assent and consent. So even consent, if you only have one way to get, I think the example we used in the paper was a repaired heart. You're still coerced into it, you'll still consent. And I think probably a lot of medical procedures are that way. But it's still that discrete event, whereas assent's that flow.
So yeah, I find myself thinking about it a lot now, because I think one of the things that's very common in the animal training world is that people use food to train behaviors, and the animal must do a specific behavior to get that food reinforcer. And typically there is no other way to get that food in that moment except to do one specific behavior. So if I'm understanding it correctly, then what we want to have is multiple behaviors or just multiple ways that same reinforcer can be accessed in that moment. That makes sense?
Yeah, and that's why in the paper we distinguished between what we called apparent assent and genuine assent, because we were seeing a lot of people talk about assent when it actually just looks like assent. Like you look and you see someone participating and they're going back and doing it again and doing it again, or they have like some kind of way to opt in, or like in the animal training world, like a start button or something. So it kind of looks like assent, but then you ask, is there any other way they can access that reinforcer? And if there's not, then that's exactly what it is, just apparent assent. It looks like assent, but it's not genuine until there's at least one degree of freedom, which simply means one alternative, one other way to access the reinforcer that's already in their repertoire, and the occasion for it has to be present too. And it has the same consequence. And then in that case, we can say, now we have genuine assent. They're doing this, but they also have an option that they can get that same reinforcer doing the other way also.
I think one thing that you said there that's really, really important is that the occasion to do these alternative behaviors is there as well. And I think one of the things that I think gets a little confusing for animal trainers is because so many of the behaviors that the animals are trained to do, they are essentially under some sort of SD, or cue, we usually tend to say, but that is under the control of the trainer, if that makes sense. So they're waiting for they don't want animals to just emit a response. They want it to be like, oh, I've given you a hand cue, or I've said the word, paw, and you give me your paw, as opposed to some thing already in the environment that the animal can go over and engage with, like, some sort of target that's hanging or a bell that they could just go over and ring. And so I think that's a little bit of a mind shift for animal trainers to think about that. You mean the animal could just leave standing in front of me and go over and do that, or it could be standing in front of me and do the behavior I cued, but it could also just offer this other behavior without me having to give it a specific signal, and I could reinforce that, and that would be actually providing some degrees of freedom and giving me information.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the cool thing about it is once you start analyzing it and looking at it this way, then you can come up with creative procedures. Like every time I teach a cue, I'm going to teach two behaviors to go with it. For example, and it starts at least that starts opening the door to giving an option, even though both options might still suck, but one of them, at least having two, can give me a lot more information than just having one. Because if there's just one path to be taken, that doesn't tell me anything because I'm withholding the reinforcer. But if there's at least more than one, now I can start see, oh, well, they can do this or that. How come they're choosing this every time? What is it about this one? So then you can start looking at your program and analyzing further.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I find now that when I'm working with clients, we start looking at behaviors that the animals already know that might be things that they can offer. So for example, like we were working with some otters and they were teaching them a behavior of go into the water. But I was like, you can make that a behavior that you'll reinforce anytime they offer it. And so that can be one of those behaviors that you can cue them to do other behaviors, but if they choose to go into the water, that's them telling you, for whatever reason, what you're asking me to do is not something I want to do, but I do want to go into the water. And that will always be reinforced. And there was another one where they had trained a leopard to ring a bell that was hanging in the enclosure. And while we were training another behavior, I think our frequency of reinforcing this new response, our approximations were not small enough. And so the animal kept going back to the bell. And to me, ringing the bell was information that, we're not reinforcing frequently enough. And so let's go ahead and reinforce that bell ringing. Don't ignore that. That's giving us information, but that gives us information. So when we have those degrees of freedom there. So it's just, kind of looking for those opportunities instead of ignoring them like we would in the past.
And doing something with the information, like you just said in your example, because I think that's just as important, not like a little less. Like it's exactly just as important, because I see people being like, we have Assent, we give people so many options, but then they don't do anything. Okay, they're not doing these three things and they're always going to this one thing. Are we just going to spend the rest of their life just doing this one thing? No, like let's actually take that information and do something with it. Let's analyze our program. What's different about that one that isn't in these, and then let's adjust one variable at a time and see if we can shift that, and see then if we can control what's the thing that's actually controlling this. Is it a repertoire thing? Is it a stimulus control thing? Is it a physical thing? Is there something that they, that's happening with their body? Is it something to do with the brightness of the room? I mean, it can be anything, but the important thing is to take that data and do something with it, and not just say, I have Assent just for the sake of having Assent. Assent is important in a program because it lets us improve a program. It's not just because, not just for ethical reasons. And I think that's an important thing, because ethics is kind of at the center of this movement, at least in the ABA world, which is good, but we need to remember there's practicality to this. This should be an opportunity for us to take feedback on our programs and improve them. We're not just doing it to be ethical, we're doing them to be effective.
I love that.
And that's really a plug for the constructional approach. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of things we hear are Assent informed or programming for Assent, but that's actually the reverse. Assent is just an indicator within your program to let you know what level of coercion, like we talked about in the paper. Goldiamond talked about degrees of freedom, and he juxtaposed it, but didn't give a calculation for degrees of coercion. But he did say that as you increase degrees of freedom, there's an inverse relationship. So it's important to remember that, Assent, you're not coming up with some procedure over here that you're putting into your program that makes it Assent. It's actually an indicator of your current program. And I love the story about the tiger. One of the things that was pointed out to me by Kyle Hetzel that was really cool is when you start to, like you said, Barbara, looking at what can the learner already do, or how are they already engaging with their environment. Sometimes the learner, the organism doesn't have that opt-out response. And so that can be really important to teach in of itself. I think, right, like touching the target could maybe mean, hey, I want to do this, which means they don't want to do that. So what, like Awab was saying, what about that other thing? Is it? And then looking at the range of different things.
Yeah, and we used to, I think in the animal training community, just say, well, walking away was opting out. But as you've pointed out, walking away, you also have to ask, what do they get when they walk away? They get nothing.
Or can
most
they,
time,
can
I
they
would
get
say
the
in
same
our
thing?
circumstances, usually not.
Right.
Usually not.
We're going to take a little break to give you your first secret word, and the secret word is genuine assent. Secret words are important to remember and submit to show you have taken this course for your professional development. All right, back to the program.
And now, in the past, I used to think differently about that. I used to think, oh, well, they just don't want to participate. And now I think it makes me feel bad when they walk away. And I think, are they walking away because they're frustrated? Are they walking away because they can't access the reinforcer in the way that I've set it up right now? And if they can't access it out there when they've walked away, I actually feel bad. Like, again, when I was thinking about the giraffes, I'm like, oh my gosh, she walked away. What did I do wrong? That she's not accessing the reinforcer here. And can she access it over there? So so now I have a very different feeling about it when an animal walks away. It's not just opting out. It's what am I doing wrong? What am I doing wrong, for sure? Yeah. So you did mention coercion, and I really wanted to ask about, because I really love what's in the paper about coercion and compulsion. I'm wondering if you can dive into those topics a little bit.
One of the things to me about coercion that really stood out when I started thinking about these things a little bit more has to do with positive reinforcement. And I think there is an assumption that delivering a reinforcer or some type of reward following a behavior means that your practice is not coercive. But if that's the only way that an organism can get that reward, they're compelled to do whatever that behavior was that you asked them to do under those circumstances. And I think that that's one of the most powerful things to me in terms of looking at the program under which our learners are required to behave. So I think we have to really look at those contingencies. And not that anyone is intentionally being coercive, but there is some occasions where we think we're being really open, that there is coercion going on. So that's one example of coercion that for me really stood out when I started to think about these things.
Yeah, I think that the notion that positive reinforcement could be coercive has never really entered a lot of people's minds before. That's definitely a new concept for people.
I mean, even the
Right.
word positive,
Right.
like it just gives this, feel of being so wonderful. And not that it isn't, it's just have to take a look a little deeper at some of these things.
And then you think about the things that sometimes people do to, enhance the efficacy of a reinforcer when there's only one way to access that reinforcer. I think that, we certainly have seen that in our community, where, again, to me, that makes me think about, are we being compassionate when we're trying to increase our effectiveness of our positive reinforcement when there are no degrees of freedom, and then we're maybe withholding food or restricting diets in order to make that positive reinforcement be more effective.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that ties into compulsion? I don't know. Or is it still coercive? I don't know. You have to help me with those distinctions.
Yeah, I'm not too sure about the distinction. In our concept analysis in the paper, we kind of went with compulsion being explicit coercion. So you're compulsing someone into doing something when you basically have the setup to where if you do it, you're okay, but if you don't do it, we're going to apply an aversive. So that's what we called in the paper compulsion or explicit coercion, like where the coercion is right in your face. I'm telling you, you either do this, if not, there's going to be an aversive. And then we went with implicit coercion being the type like what we were talking about earlier, where it looks like it's not coercion, but actually it is. So that's when you have 0 degrees of freedom, when you have no alternative. So there's a positive reinforcer there, but you only have one way to get it. So you're coerced into doing that by the use of positive reinforcement. So I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure if we thought about this more, we could get more into the weeds between compulsion and coercion, but I feel like we use them kind of interchangeably in the paper.
So more work to be done on compulsion and coercion then, huh?
Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done on coercion for sure.
It's a fascinating topic, though. I mean, it really, I don't know. I was definitely getting into that section for sure. So you mentioned a little bit about extinction, and maybe that's worth exploring a little bit more. Maybe why. I'll let you expand upon it. I'm not gonna. I don't want to put words in your mouth. So how is it that why are we kind of avoiding the extinction process now? Because I will say that that's something that's been used a lot in animal training too.
Well, to me, that gets back to the constructional approach again. I mean, the purpose of what we're trying to convey is to build behavior, to construct it, and, constructional, to construct behavior. And in extinction procedures, we're looking at withholding reinforcement to reduce behavior. And so that's the big distinction. But that needs to be done through an analysis of the program and what you're doing. So oftentimes you can learn from the behavior, which it's interesting. Another, thing about thinking about behavior and thinking about a nonlinear approach and why the behavior is never maladaptive, but actually adaptive for that organism, even though it could be at a greater cost for that organism, is important information on what repertoires may need to be built. So rather than focusing our attention on reducing those, what we consider problems or disturbing patterns of behavior, looking at why are those occurring, and what alternatives does that organism have to be able to get that same consequence at a lower cost or the same cost as the disturbing pattern. So that's a really important thing to consider. in any program. And that's really getting at the heart of the constructional approach and the nonlinear approach, of which Assent can inform in terms of how you set up those programs.
Yeah, and just to be a little clear on extinction, like we're not saying you're never going to use extinction ever, and if you use it, you're a bad guy and we're done with you. Like sometimes there's extinction and it happens in nature, and it happens during shaping sometimes. I mean, even if it's little bits of it, like what Jesus Rosales Ruiz calls mini extinctions in shaping. So it's not like extinction is our enemy, but like Anna was saying, the important thing about it is that our focus is on building the repertoires. The focus is on the main question in the constructional approach, which is what is the repertoire, the absence of which is the problem. So we're coming in looking at what's missing here, what needs to be established, where when it's in place, the problem will no longer be a problem. So you're coming in already saying, what repertoire do I want to build? And if you're coming in looking to build, then usually there's not a big need to go full extinction on something, especially when we know there's better strategies out there, things like conjugate reinforcement or manipulating reinforcement parameters, where you're still reinforcing it, but maybe with a little bit less of reinforcer. Less can be with any dimension of a reinforcer. Whereas the response that you want, you reinforce a little bit more, which now, bringing it back to degrees of freedom and Assent, this puts us in kind of a gray area, because I'm saying, I know you're a critical reinforcer. I know the reinforcer that's controlling this contingency right now, but I'm going to vary the amount of it. So I don't know, does that actually count as a degree of freedom? Is that a little bit different? I'm not sure. But if we're comparing manipulating a parameter of reinforcement versus withholding it altogether, I would go on that side. Because again, we're talking in the real world. We're talking on the ground floor, like practitioners, people who are doing this every day. It's not reasonable to go in and be on the philosophical level and be like, extinction is bad. Well, that's not going to work. Like people are actually doing this in real life, and it's just important to remember that might be a little part of your program, but the important part is that we're always looking to build. We're always looking at what to reinforce, and no one starts with zero. You always look at what's the current relevant repertoire. People have strengths. Let's use those. Let's capitalize on them. And let's actually focus on building rather than what do we need to put on extinction.
And I think that's one of the dangers of thinking about Assent without considering the analysis, because it seems like some folks out there are just confused. Well, do I just have no expectation? Can the person just do whatever they want whenever they want? If I start to impose some kind of demands, is that then, am I not using Assent and therefore being coercive in my procedures? So, that again, if folks get the book, nothing in there is off limits, like Awab said. It's just how you deploy the different components, and then how do you actually get to your terminal goals. And it should be based on building the repertoire.
It makes me think about this one individual giraffe who she does some undesired responses where for lack of a better term, when there's certain things happening that she doesn't like, she will kick a little bit. And obviously it'll get more pronounced if things are not the way she wants them. But, we're trying to identify those conditions. But as we're getting better at identifying what those conditions are and what outcome she wants, we're doing, I think what you're describing here, we're trying to really reinforce heavily desired responses. So we're trying to identify, okay, this is, I think, what she's telling us she wants under these conditions. So let's try and heavily reinforce that. And if a kick happens, we're just like, we just weren't good enough at reinforcing, getting her what she wants when she wants it under these conditions, and making sure the thing that she wasn't so happy about didn't happen, like, the other guy got too close and she doesn't like him being so close, or she was kind of over getting pellets and we probably should have switched to brows a little bit sooner. And so, as we're slowly figuring out what it is she wants, we don't go, oh, she kicked, we shouldn't have reinforced. We just go, oh, well, she kicked and she let us know we just didn't do the right thing in that moment. But we are seeing that kicking is happening less. And I think it's because we're getting better at figuring out what we need to do to make sure that she doesn't feel the need to kick. but we're not, going, oh my God, she kicked, we must step back and just stop everything. And so we're not, putting that on extinction. We're just saying, it's information for us that we need to change what we're doing so that, and again, we're getting better at identifying the conditions that seem to be contributing to that. So
it's really important too, because extinction, I see a lot of folks that are very worried about reinforcing the behavior they don't want. Which of course, I mean, we don't want to reinforce the heck out of something that could be dangerous or whatever. But if you're using a heavy extinction procedure, that organism is going to work harder to get that reinforcer, and then you can end up shaping a lot of other problems that weren't there in the first place. So being mindful of some of those things too is really important when looking at your program.
Yeah, and obviously we don't want her to escalate kicking because we didn't pay attention to the fact that, she didn't like that. And so we're and back up and just went, okay, well, we're not going to do anything with you anymore. I mean, that could just make it worse.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Animal. So yeah, definitely all this stuff, for me, what I enjoy doing with it when I hear people like you who've written the papers about it give me information as I think about it, and I try to apply it to what I'm doing, and hopefully I can add a visual to it and see how it's helping me with my work in real life, and hopefully people will have an opportunity to take this information and digest it as well and apply it to what they're doing. So again, we should tell people that both of these papers were published in Behavior Analysis and Practice, but I will provide links so that they can find the articles themselves and read them as well. But I wanted to make sure, I feel like I asked all the questions I wanted to ask, but did you have any other things you wanted to mention about this topic that I didn't ask?
I just want to reiterate that in all your examples, I really enjoy hearing them because of the analysis process of what you do with that information. When you see assent being withdrawn, what do you do with it? And I just want to make sure we don't get off here before I very clearly make the point that just because you have assent doesn't mean you have a good program. Just because you have assent doesn't mean you created the perfect environment and your teaching is perfect. And there's a lot more that goes into programming. There's a lot more that goes into teaching. Having assent is one factor. It's an important factor, but it's one factor. And it's really important because of the ethical reasons, which I don't really want to dive into, but because of the ethical reasons, self-determination, giving people choices, those are really important things. But I want to talk more about the applied side of things, the technological part that will actually affect the procedures. So it's important because we work constantly to make the programs better for our learners, whether humans or non-humans. And again, I can give people a million alternatives and just sit there and not teach them anything, and we'll have assent all the time. But that's not the goal. So again, when things like this get kind of become a hot topic and a buzzword, then people are like, oh, I have assent, I have assent. Do we have assent? Do we not have assent? And then that becomes the center. But that's not the only thing that matters. There's a lot more that goes into having a good program. There's the shaping skills. There's setting up the reinforcement systems. There's making sure you're teaching in a place that's reasonable, really assessing that current relevant repertoire, knowing where they are, having a good idea of where you want to go, all the components of the constructional approach, and all the stuff that we learn from instructional design about how to arrange those programs to actually take our learners where they want to go. Those are also very important for people to pay attention to, and they're worth just as much, if not more, attention than this topic. So I just want to make sure I mention that so people can keep that in mind. Yes, we want to be compassionate. Yes, assent is very important. Also, very important is being effective and making sure we're not wasting people or animals' times, and we're giving them what they need, and we're doing them justice by actually giving them what they came to us for.
Wow. That was a very profound way to, I think, wrap up this particular interview. And maybe with that, we should also make sure we mention the book on nonlinear contingency analysis again, of which Awab is one of the authors. So we'll also make sure there's a link to that so that people can get more information about that. And maybe I'll also make sure there's a link to the Goldiamond paper from 1974. which also has some great resources as well. So
time for your second secret word, and the secret word is Goldiamond. All right, let's get back to the program.
again, thank you so much, Anna and Awab. This is really helpful. Oh, and Awab has more to say, please.
No, I think Anna was going to say something before I...
Oh, okay. Yes,
Do you have
Anna,
any
yes, please.
last remarks, Anna?
I mean, it's hard to follow
nice.
that. Oh, wow. The only thing I would say that we talked about in the paper that I just would want people to be aware of, because what Awab talked about is really hard. There's a lot that goes into it. It's very effortful, and I think we just need to make sure we're moving beyond just watching the form of behavior, what we call the topography of behavior. Just because an animal or a human is approaching an activity does not necessarily mean you have assent, right? Again, it could be, is that the only way the animal has to get that food or other things? So just making sure we look past the form of behavior, because I think that's easy to fall back on when the other stuff gets a little harder, demanding.
Excellent. And I think for animal trainers, that's really important information to hear, because we are just, again, so accustomed to, I gave it a treat. That's all I need, right? So I think it's extremely important to have all this information shared, and also the additional information about what happens after that, after assent. That's only one component of a very much larger picture. So again, thank you so much, and we'll make sure we provide all these links so that people can get additional information. So thank you again, Anna and Awab.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you liked what you heard today, visit animaltrainingfundamentals.com for more quality content on animal training. You'll find courses, community, and extensive video examples from my consulting work around the world. We'd love to have you join our force-free family. Get your animal training credentials. Get credentialed by the most comprehensive, in-depth, engaging program designed to foster significant professional growth. Get recognized for your professional development. Now accessible in over 35 different languages. Visit animaltrainingfundamentals.com to learn more.